Hello, and we will be starting the book, The Worst Class Trip Ever by Dave Barry. We will start with chapter 1 today. So if you will turn with me in your book to page 3, that's where we'll be starting, chapter 1, page 3. Chapter 1. None of this stuff would have happened if I hadn't been sitting next to Matthew Diaz. Don't get me wrong, Matt is my best friend, but he can be an idiot. But when we were in kindergarten, pretty much all the boys were idiots. So he didn't stand out so much, and we became best friends. So now, even though we're in the 8th grade, and he's sometimes unbelievably annoying, I'm kind of stuck with him. That's why I ended up sitting next to him on the plane on the class trip. I think about that sometimes. If I'd been sitting anywhere else, I would have had a normal class trip. And none of this insane mess would have happened. On the other hand, when I think about what could have happened if I hadn't been sitting next to Matt on that flight, okay, I guess this is starting to sound pretty mysterious. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Wyatt Palmer. I'm an 8th grader at Culver Middle School in Miami. I know a lot of people think Miami is a weird place, but it's my home. So I'm used to the kind of things that happen there that don't happen in normal places. Like there was this incident that happened about 6 months ago when my dad went outside to get the Miami Herald off our lawn. My dad likes to read the sports section while he has his coffee, so he can complain about how much the Dolphins suck. So first thing, every morning he goes outside and gets the paper off the lawn. For years, he did this wearing only his boxers. My mom hated this. She was always telling my dad to at least put on a bathrobe. Because what if somebody saw him? My dad said nobody's going to be out there at 6:30 a.m. And besides, wearing boxer shorts is the same as wearing a bathing suit. This is not really true, especially if you saw my dad's bedtime boxers, which have like 0 elastic and a lot of holes, and according to my mom, are held together mainly by stains. A couple of times she threw them away, but my dad went and got them out of the trash. He's very loyal to his boxers. So anyway, this particular morning, my dad went outside as usual to get the paper. And as usual, our dog, Sanka, stood in the doorway to watch him. Sanka likes to keep an eye on things, but he knows he's not allowed to go outside without a leash. Anyway, my dad was out there bending over to pick up the newspaper. Trust me, you do not want to see that. And all of a sudden, Sanka started barking like crazy. My dad jumped up and turned around, and he was about to yell at Zonka to shut up when all of a sudden he saw what Zonka was barking at, an alligator. We live near a canal. There are canals all over Miami, and they connect to the Everglades, which means if you live here, you basically live in a swamp. I mean, we have houses and roads and shopping centers and stuff, but it's all built on top of a swamp. And as far as the swamp animals are concerned, it's still a swamp, and it's still theirs. It's normal for us to see snakes in our yards and lizards and all kinds of frogs and big tail waiting birds and even crabs in some neighborhoods. And every now and then an alligator shows up. This particular alligator, which was not a small alligator, was on our lawn maybe 10 feet from our walkway, which means my dad went right past without seeing it on his way to the newspaper. But he definitely saw it when Zonka started barking, and no way was he going to try to walk past it again. He started yelling, "Rosa, Rosa," calling my mom. She and my sister Taylor and I all went running to the door to see what was going on. My dad was out on the sidewalk holding up his boxers with one hand and using the other one to point the Miami Herald at the alligator like it was a whipping or something. My mom screamed and so did Taylor, and maybe I also made an unmanly noise because it really was a pretty major alligator. "Call 911," shouted my dad. "Hurry!" "Okay," said my mom, running to the kitchen. By now, Zonka was really going crazy barking. He was also out of the house, which was a violation of the leash rule, but I guess he figured he was protecting my dad. What he really was doing was upsetting the alligator, which started to move forward in that slow way alligators walk. I think it was going for Zonka, but it was moving kind of in the direction of Taylor and me. So my father came running down the walk, waving the Miami Herald toward the alligator and going, "Shoo, get away." That was definitely the bravest thing I ever saw my dad do, but it did not impress the alligator. What it did was make the alligator turn more in the direction of my dad, who turned right around and went sprinting back toward the sidewalk. "Run in a zigzag pattern," shouted Taylor. The reason she shouted that was, in Florida, some people believe alligators can only run in a straight line. So they tell kids that if a gator is chasing them, they should run in a zigzag pattern. But it's a myth. In 5th grade, my science teacher, Miss Bunce, showed us a video of an alligator chasing a dead chicken being dragged by a guy in a zigzag pattern. And the gator had no trouble following it. Miss Bunce said you should run in a straight line. "That's a myth," I shouted to my dad. "Run in a straight line." "Are you trying to kill him?" yelled Taylor, punching my arm. She's in 6th grade and very dramatic. The truth was, my dad couldn't hear either of us. Some of Zonka's barking, which was getting even louder. The alligator was now standing right on the walkway, and Zonka was getting pretty close to it, which was not good because alligators, besides being able to zigzag, can also move really fast when they want to. The one in Miss Bunce's video caught the chicken and almost caught the guy dragging it. The police came pretty fast, 3 cars in like 2 minutes. They stopped in the street in front of our house with their lights flashing. All the neighbors came out of their houses to see what was going on. Also, people on their way to work were stopping their cars to watch. The police got out of their cars but didn't get too close to the alligator, which was still watching Zonka, who was still barking. So everyone just stood around for a few minutes while more commuters stopped their cars. So by now, there was a pretty big crowd out there with my dad. Finally, some animal control officers showed up. They're used to alligators on people's lawns, and they handled this one in like 5 minutes. They snatched it up with a noose, duct taped its mouth shut, and took it away in a van. The neighbors went back inside and the commuters drove away, and Zonka finally shut up. And it was all over except for my mom reminding my dad that she told him not to wear his boxers outside. But did he listen? No, he did not listen, etc., like 650 times. That night when we were eating dinner, I got a text from a kid in my class saying, "Chan 4 now, LOL." So we turned on the kitchen TV, and there was our house in a cell phone video one of the commuters took. You could see the gator, and there was a nice close-up of my dad, holding up his holy boxers with his belly sagging down and his hair sticking out every direction the way it does in the morning. I said, "Real good look, Dad." My dad said, "They can't show that without my permission, can they?" Taylor said, "I'm going to skip school for the rest of my life." My mom didn't say anything, which is not like her. She's Cuban. She just stared at the TV until the gator story was over. Then she got up and walked out of the kitchen. About a minute later, we heard the patio door open and close. We went to look, and there was my mom on the patio next to the pool standing over my dad's boxers, which were on fire. When they were totally burned up, she splashed some pool water on the ashes and walked back into the house. First past my dad, not saying a word. I don't know if they talked about it later. I do know that the next morning when he went out to get the paper, he wore a bathrobe. But my point, I bet you forgot I had a point, is that the stuff like that, an alligator on the lawn, happens all the time in Miami. You get used to it. The way you get used to the palm trees and hurricanes and hardly ever needing a sweater. Also, you get used to hearing Spanish, like my mom. She grew up in the U.S. and speaks English without an accent. But when her family's around, all the aunts and uncles and cousins, like 17,000 of them, she switches to Spanish. I grew up understanding it, and at Culver Middle School, some of my classes are totally in Spanish. Other kids take classes in French and German. Culver is a language magnet school. What it's mainly a magnet for, if you want to know the truth, is nerds. But I'm basically a nerd myself. I admit it, so I like it. And it turned out that being nerdy was pretty handy on the class trip. The trip was for the Culver 8th grade civics classes. Every year they go to Washington, D.C. This year, there were 37 kids on the trip, plus 2 teachers and 8 parent chaperones. The teachers were Mr. Arnold Bartow and Miss Christine Rector. Mr. Bartow is my civics teacher, and he's a good enough guy, but he forgets stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff. Like, he'll say, today we're going to cover the 6th Amendment to the Constitution. And we'll all be like, we already covered that. And he's like, we did? When? And we're like, last year in 7th grade. And he's like, wait, you aren't 7th grade? And we're like, no, we're 8th grade. And he'll look at us and blink like he just noticed us and go, oh, right. You probably think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. He's a good teacher, but his brain works kind of backwards. Unless something happened 200 years ago, he can't remember it. I never had a class with Miss Rector, but a lot of kids like her. She's pretty for a teacher, and she's smart. And I was glad she was one of the teachers in charge of the Washington trip, because Mr. Bartow was in charge all by himself. We'd have probably ended up in Brazil. Although, looking back on it, that might have been better. The chaperones were 6 moms and 2 dads, and the most important thing about them was none of them was my mom and dad. I mean, I love my mom and dad most of the time, but the older I get, the more I like to love them from a distance, if you know what I mean. The class trip left early in the morning from the Miami airport. My parents dropped me off. My dad gave me some money and told me to spend it wisely, referring to the time in 4th grade when my class went to the Seaquarium, and my dad gave me $5 and I used it to buy 5 bags of Cheez-Its from a vending machine, and I ate them all. And on the way back to school, I threw up orange glop all over the bus. My mom hugged me really hard and told me she loved me very much and she was going to miss me. And if I did anything stupid in Washington, she would kill me. When the parents were gone, Mr. Bartow gathered all the kids and chaperones together for a little speech. He told us that it was a privilege for us to be on this trip to Washington, and he expected us to be on our very best behavior as ambassadors representing Culver Middle School. That was when Cameron Frank farted. He's one of those kids who can fart whenever he wants to. His insides must be like 75% gas. Sometimes I think he could actually explode. A bunch of kids laughed, and Mr. Bartow glared at us and said that if we thought he was going to tolerate those kind of shenanigans, he actually said shenanigans. We were sadly mistaken, and he would not hesitate to send troublemakers home. And did he make himself clear? Everybody was quiet for about 10 seconds while Mr. Bartow looked around at us with a look that I guess was supposed to be scary. Then Cameron Frank farted again. This time, everybody laughed. Even the chaperones were trying not to crack up. Mr. Bardo said a few more strict things, but I think he realized he was losing us. So he clapped his hands and said, "All right, let's go." He started marching off wearing his homogeneous backpack, like he was a general leading us into battle, except he was going the wrong direction. Miss Rector had to catch him and aim him the right way. That was how we started our class trip. We went through security and walked to the gate. I was technically walking with Matt Diaz and some other kids who are my friends, but I was trying to walk near Susana Delgado. I really like Susana Delgado, who is the most beautiful girl in the 8th grade and probably the world. She has like 183 million Instagram followers. She's also really smart and funny and pretty nice for everybody, for somebody that's beautiful. Basically, she's perfect except for her height, which is tall, or at least taller than me. I'm kind of short. Okay, I'm not kind of short, I'm short. My mom claims everybody in our family starts out short and I'll end up normal, but that doesn't do me any good now. The thing I wanted to do more than anything else in the world was to date Susana Delgado, but I couldn't ask her. Not because she was tall, not because she was dating, but because she was dating Jean-Philippe Dumas, better known as JP, who's in the French program. He's also tall, even taller than Susanna. Sometimes I look at him, standing around being tall without even trying, and I want to kill him, except he could definitely beat me up. My plan was to wait for JP and Susanna to break up and then see if she would date me. The problem was they were like a permanent couple. When we went on the class trip, they'd been dating for nearly 5 weeks, which I think was a Culver Middle School record. But I still tried to talk to Susanna and text her whenever I could think of a reason. Like, we were in the same math class, so every school night I text her to ask her what the math homework was. The truth was, I already knew the math homework, and pretty soon she figured that out. But she went along with it, and it turned into kind of a joke. Her making up funny answers, like she'd say the math homework was to figure out the square root of a hamster, stuff like that. Sometimes we'd even make jokes about it in school, talking in person. I definitely think she liked me, but she was still dating JP, and he was still tall. So anyway, we got to our gate and stood around for a while, me standing near Susanna, but not actually saying anything to her. When it was time to get on the plane, Mr. Bartow told us we all had to go straight to our assigned seat, which we all did except for Mr. Bartow, who went straight to the completely wrong seat and had to be steered to the right one by Miss Rector. I was in a middle seat next to Matt Diaz, who had a window seat on the left side of the plane. On my other side, unfortunately, was Cameron, gas attack Frank. Susanna was 2 rows behind me with 2 of her friends. In the row between us were an old lady and 2 guys, probably in their 30s. One of them was short, with really long, stringy hair that looked like seaweed, wearing sunglasses and a backpack and purple Crocs, which you don't usually see on a grown man. He had the window seat behind Matt. The other one was very big and very bald. He was wearing a black t-shirt and he had huge arms with some kind of snakes tattooed on them. He was carrying a long black duffel bag, which he spent like 5 minutes trying to stuff into the overhead luggage space, holding up all the people trying to get to their seats. Finally, one of the flight attendants, who was 80 gazillion years old and probably was a flight attendant for the Wright brothers, came back and told the bald guy he would have to check the bag. "No," he said, like really angry. "It will fit." He had some kind of accent, but not Spanish. He pushed the bag really hard and got it to go in. The flight attendant gave him a look, but didn't say anything. He looked like a guy you didn't want to get any more upset than he already was, which is exactly what my friend Matt, who I believe I already mentioned can be an idiot, proceeded to do. He pointed up at the luggage compartment and said, too loud, as usual, "What do you think he has in that bag? A missile?" The big guy heard this. He looked down at Matt like he was about to pick him up by the neck and stuff him into the overhead space, which the guy was definitely big enough to do. The shorter guy with the sunglasses said something to him, and he sat down. "Geez," said Matt, still too loud. "Maybe it is a missile." "Will you shut up?" I said, but it was too late. We looked back, and the big guy was leaning forward, his head almost in our row, glaring at Matt for like 10 seconds, just leaning over us and staring. He was really close, and he looked a little crazy. And I'll be honest, I was scared. Then the little guy said something again, and the big guy sat back. Matt and I looked at each other like, whoa. But even Matt wasn't stupid enough to say anything else. When the plane was loaded, the same flight attendant came down the aisle checking things, and she told the little guy he couldn't hold his backpack in his lap. He said, "I need to hold it." "I'm sorry, sir," she said, not sounding sorry. "You can't hold it during takeoff and landing. It is very important. You can hold it after we take off. Right now, it has to go in the overhead." She reached for the backpack. "No," said the little guy, pulling it away. "All right," she said, "then you'll have to put it under the seat in front of you." "I am not comfortable doing that." "Sir," said the flight attendant, "you cannot have that in your lap. Either you stow it now or you'll have to get off the plane." This time the big guy said something quietly to the little guy in what I think was a foreign language. The little guy sighed and stuck the backpack under the seat in front of him, which was the seat that Matt was sitting in. The flight attendant gave the little guy a look and walked away. Matt leaned over to him. "What do you think's in the backpack?" he said, whispering, fortunately. "How would I know?" I said. "You think it's a bomb?" "No." "Why not?" "Because, moron, he had to go through security." "Well, then what is it? Why's he acting so weird? Him and his friend with the missile." "It's not a missile," I said too loud. "That's the kind of thing Matt makes you do." And all of a sudden I realized the big guy was leaning forward and glaring at us again. So I shut up. We stayed quiet during the safety lecture, where they show you how to fasten your seatbelt and tell you that your seat cushion floats, which I'm sure would be really helpful if the plane actually crashed into the ocean at 500 miles an hour. I noticed that after we took off, the little guy immediately reached down and got the backpack out from under Matt's seat. But then I stopped thinking about him and started trying to figure out how to talk to Susanna, 2 rows behind. My idea was to pretend I had to go to the bathroom, and then when I walked past her, I would say some funny thing that would make her laugh, and we would start having a conversation with me standing in the aisle, which was good because I would be standing and she would be sitting down, so I'd be taller. This seemed like a solid plan, except for one thing. I didn't have anything funny to say. I spent the first half hour of the flight trying to think of jokes, which wasn't easy because Matt kept whispering to me about the guys behind us, who he was convinced were terrorists planning to blow up the plane. Finally, I came up with a joke. I'd walk by and I'd say to Susanna, casually, like I just thought of it, "Do you know where the emergency exit is?" And she'd say something like, "Why are you looking for the emergency exit?" And I'd say, "Because I'm sitting next to Cameron Frank and I need some fresh air." I'm not saying this was hilarious. I'm saying this was the best I could do under the circumstances. I was going over my lines in my head. Do you know where the emergency exit is? Rehearsing for my big moment. Meanwhile, Matt kept sneaking peeks back at the weird two guys behind us and whispering reports to me. They're looking at something, he said. So what? I said. We need to find out what it is, he said. No, we don't, I said. Anyway, we finally got to the altitude where you can walk around, so I got up and started toward the back of the plane. I noticed out of the side of my eye that the two weird guys behind us actually were looking at something, kind of hunched over it, so you couldn't see what it was. But I was focused on Susanna. I was so focused on Susanna that I didn't see that the man in the seat right across the aisle had his leg sticking out. What happened next was the kind of horrible, embarrassing failure that your brain memorizes every single detail of, so it can torture you by playing it in your head over and over and over for the rest of your life. This is how it went. Me, to Susanna, pretending I am just thinking this up as I pass by. Hey, do you know where the wham sound of me tripping and falling on my face in the aisle? Susanna, oh my God, Wyatt, are you okay? Me, getting up trying to look like something happened. I'm fine. Susanna, are you sure? Me, thinking of some moronic reason that I should still do my moronic rehearsed joke. I was just wondering if you knew where the emergency exit was. 8 gazillion-year-old flight attendant coming down the aisle to see why I fell down and not looking happy. What's going on here? Me, nothing, I fell down. Susanna, why do you need the emergency exit? 8 zillion-year-old flight attendant. What about the emergency exit? Me, nothing. Susanna, you just asked me where the emergency exit is. Me, reaching new heights of being a moron. I did. Susanna, yes, you did. 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant to me. Do you not understand that the emergency exits are an important safety feature of this aircraft, and it's a very serious matter to tamper with them in any way? Me, no. 8 gazillion-year-old flight attendant. No? Me. Yes, I understand. I was just, there's this kid who farts. 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant. What? Mr. Bardo, coming down the aisle from his seat. Is something wrong? 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant. This young man seems to think there's something amusing about the emergency exits. Mr. Bartow. Wyatt, do you think there's something amusing about the emergency exits? Me. No, I was. 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant. He also said something about farts. Mr. Bartow. What about farts, Wyatt? Me. No, I was only nothing. Never mind. Mr. Bardo, Wyatt, I want you to return to your seat right now. And if you don't want to be sent home from this trip, there had better be no more of this behavior. Am I clear? Me, yes. I went back to my seat. Behind me, I could hear Susanna and her friends giggling. Now I really did wish I could jump out the emergency exit. What was that all about? Said Matt. Shut up, I said. Listen, he said, not shutting up. The guys behind us were watching us. Great. No, listen. While they were watching you, I got a look at what they were looking at. Good for you. And get this. They're looking at aerial photographs. So? They're aerial photographs of the White House. I looked at him. Are you sure? He nodded twice, really fast, up and down, and whispered, aerial photographs of the White House. I thought about that for a couple of seconds. There could be a simple explanation, I said. Like what? Like, I don't know, they're terrorists and they'll be walking around the White House area and they want to see what's around there from the air. Even while I was saying this, it sounded stupid. Matt shook his head. Terrorists use maps, not aerial photographs. I ducked down and snuck a peek between Matt's and my seatbelts at the weird guys behind us. They were looking at something, and they were definitely hunched over it like they didn't want anybody walking past in the aisle to see. But from my angle, I got a quick glimpse, and Matt was right. It was a photo of the White House taken from the air. I looked back at Matt. He raised his eyebrows. "See," he said. "What do you think they're doing?" "Add it up," he said. "There's two weird guys, both carrying things that they're actually all weird about, right? Right. And now they're looking at an aerial photograph of the White House, right? Right. Now think about it. What does this airplane practically fly right over when we get to Washington?" I thought about it. I went to Washington with my family in fourth grade, and I remembered that when the plane was landing, it flew over the Potomac River, and my dad was pointing to famous stuff out the left side window, really close. The Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the White House. "Oh man," I said. "Yeah," said Matt. "And you laughed when I said they had a missile." "But they can't have a missile. They got through airport security," Matt snorted. "Did you see those airport security people? I think you could drive a tank past them as long as it didn't contain any liquids." "No, seriously, there's no way they could." Okay. Say it's not a missile. Maybe it's some other kind of weapon. Something that has two pieces, and it's only dangerous if you put them together. One piece is in the big guy's black bag up there, and the other one's in the weird little dude's backpack. When we get near Washington, they put the pieces together and it forms some kind of new thing that does something bad. Like what? Like blow up the plane, or it's some kind of high-tech gun, or a thing they can use to smash through the cockpit door. I don't know what it is, but it's something. I thought about it some more. Matt can be an idiot, but he's not a complete idiot. I said, "So what should we do?" "Maybe we should tell the flight attendant." I looked toward the front of the plane. The mean 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant was glaring around the cabin like she was about to cast a spell and turn everybody into a frog. I imagined what it would be like to go up to her and tell her that we thought the two guys behind us were terrorists, based on not a whole lot, really. "Why don't you tell her?" I said. "I'm not going to tell her," said Matt. "Why don't you tell her?" "She already hates me," I said. "I think she hates everybody," said Matt. "Okay," I said. "We won't say anything now, but we'll watch them. If they do anything weird, especially when we're getting near the White House, we'll do something." "Like what? Like yell or something?" "That's our plan. We yell or something." "Do you have a better plan?" "No." "Then that's our plan." For the next hour or so, we just sat there feeling nervous. I was so nervous I didn't even think about Susanna. Every now and then, we snuck a peek back between the seats at the weird guys. They had put away the photograph and mostly talked in low voices. The little guy kept the backpack on his lap. Then the pilot announced that we were beginning our descent into Washington. He said there was turbulence and it was going to be a little bumpy, and everyone should make sure their seat belts were fastened. They told us to turn off our laptop computers and put everything away. Matt and I peeked back and saw that the weird little guy still had his backpack in his lap. The 80 gazillion-year-old flight attendant came by and stopped next to him. "Sir," she said, "you have to put that away." "I would prefer to hold it," he said. "Sir," she said, and you could tell she was about to lose it, "you have to put it away." The little guy looked like he was about to say something, but then he put it away. The backpack was now right under Matt's seat. We could feel the plane descending, then turning. We were over the Potomac River now. Matt and I were sneaking a lot of peeks back. The two weird guys were staring out the window. The air started getting bumpy, really bumpy. Stuff on the plane were rattling and people were making nervous sounds. The plane was really low now. I could see buildings out the left side window. I peeked back. The two weird guys were glued to the window. The big guy leaned over into the little guy's seat, the two of them staring out. We're coming up to the White House, said Matt. Right then the plane bumped hard. It felt like we slammed into an elephant in midair. Some people screamed. I was really scared. There was another big bump, and the whole plane lurched sideways. More screams. Suddenly, Matt grabbed my arm and said, "He's getting the backpack." I looked back and saw the little weird guy was leaning down toward the storage area under Matt's seat. "We got to stop him," said Matt. I was going to ask him how, but before I could say anything, he turned around and slid down off his seat onto the floor into the foot space. "What are you doing?" I said, but then I saw he was reaching under the seat and grabbing the guy's backpack, trying to pull it through the opening under his seat. "No," shouted the little weird guy from behind us. "Let go of that, let go." Now there was a tug of war going on, with Matt trying to pull the backpack forward and the little weird guy trying to pull it back. The little weird guy kept yelling at Matt to let go, but he wouldn't. The big weird guy leaned forward over the seat, also yelling at Matt and trying to grab him, but he had his seat belt on, so Matt was too low for him to reach. People around us saw what was happening, but the plane was still bumping and shaking pretty hard. So most of the passengers were too busy being nervous to notice. Outside the window, I could see the land getting closer, and then, whoomp, the plane touched down hard, bounced, and then stayed down. Some people cheered. Meanwhile, Matt and the little weird guy were still fighting their tug of war. The little guy still shouting at Matt to let go of the backpack. The big weird guy was standing up now, leaning over into our row. "Sir, sit down." This was the 80-gazillion-year-old flight attendant shouting over the PA system. The big guy sat down, but he kept trying to reach Matt. The plane was slowing down. Most people were looking at our row, trying to see what the yelling was about. The 80-gazillion-year-old flight attendant was moving down the aisle toward us, looking very unhappy. "Got it," said Matt, pulling the backpack all the way through the seat. "Give it to me," shouted the little guy, practically diving over the seat, grabbing at Matt. Matt was leaning over the backpack, protecting it with his body. I could see he was unzipping one of the side pockets. Now both the big guy and the little guy were leaning over him. The big guy grabbed him under his arms and started lifting him, pulling him right up through the seatbelt. "Wyatt, here," said Matt. He shoved the backpack at me, and without really thinking about it, I took it, which meant I was holding it when the flight attendant got to our row. The plane had just rolled to a stop, and pretty much everybody was now looking in our direction. "What's going on here?" said the flight attendant. "Why are you holding that boy?" The big guy let go of Matt, who plopped down into his seat. "That boy has my property," shouted the little guy, pointing at me. So now everybody on the plane was looking at me. Not Matt, me. "Is that his backpack?" said the flight attendant. I said, which I admit was not a brilliant statement, but it was definitely smarter than what Matt said, which was, quote, "It has a bomb in it." You can imagine what a big hit that was. On a crowded airplane, people started screaming and trying to get away, but we were still taxiing on the runway, so the doors were closed and there was nowhere to go. "Quiet!" shouted a deep voice, so loud that people actually got pretty quiet. "Everybody back in your seats now." The deep voice, belonging to a wide man in jeans and a sweater who was coming down the aisle from first class. People were getting out of his way and sitting back down. I'm a federal air marshal, the wide man said. What's going on here? The flight attendant pointed at me and said, he says he has a bomb. This was not really true, but before I could point that out, the marshal said to me, what's your name, son? Wyatt Palmer. What's in the backpack? I don't know. Then why'd you say it was a bomb? I didn't. Then who did? I did, said Matt. The wide man looked at Matt. And you are Matt Diaz. Okay, why did you say it was a bomb? Matt pointed at the two weird guys behind us and said, it belongs to them, and they were actually weird. How were they acting weird? They were looking at aerial photos of the White House. The marshal looked at the two guys and said, is that true? The big guy said, yes. He held up a book. On the cover was an aerial photo of the Capitol. The book was titled Washington from the Air. We are tourists, said the big guy. We are first time coming to city of Washington, so we are reading this book. The marshal looked at Matt. So that's why you thought they had a bomb? Not just that, said Matt. He pointed at the little guy. When the plane was coming over the White House, he was reaching for his backpack. The marshal looked at the little guy and said, were you reaching for the backpack? No, said the little guy. I was reaching for this. He held up a big barf bag. It looked full. Ew, said Susan Delgado. The marshal looked at me and said, give me that backpack. I gave it to him. He looked at the little guy and said, do you mind if I look inside? I thought the little guy hesitated just a tenth of a second before he said, no, it's fine. The marshal unzipped the backpack and looked inside. He looked up at the little guy and said, mind if I take it out? The little guy nodded. Of course, he said, but please be careful. The marshal set the backpack down on the seat, reached inside and pulled out a dragon head. It was made out of some lightweight material and painted a million colors. It had big, buggy eyes and an open mouth filled with long, sharp, fangy-looking teeth. The marshal held it up and looked at it. Nice, he said. Thank you, said the little guy. I made it. I am an artist. I am artist. I make traditional folk art from my country. And what country is that? Kazakhstan is near... I know where it is. The marshal put the dragon head back into the backpack and handed it to the little guy. He looked at Matt and me. It wasn't a friendly look. Listen, said Matt. I still think... I grabbed his arm. Shut up, I said. But there's... Just for once, shut up, okay? The plane was at the gate now, and the front door was opening. People were standing and getting their stuff down from the overhead storage. I reached down to get my backpack, hoping that somehow all this would just go away. But, hold on, said the marshal, putting his hand on my shoulder. You boys are staying right here. Matt and I sat in our seats while everyone else got off the plane except Mr. Bardo, who stood with his arms folded staring at us. The worst was when other kids went past us. Some of them were laughing. Susanna looked at me and just shook her head. The two weird guys took their time getting ready to leave, so they were almost the last ones off. The big guy got his long black bag down from the overhead, and the two of them headed for the front of the plane. When they got there, the little guy turned and looked back. He made sure the marshal wasn't looking his way. Then he looked straight at me and Matt, held up his backpack and smiled at us. A really creepy smile. And that is the end of chapter 1.